Good evening and welcome to another episode of Rich Politics with me, your host, Richard Taylor, a Welshman ranting about all things politics. And you may have noticed this last week, we've not been able to broadcast for the very simple reason we've had massive technical issues here and we've not been able to put any shows on for you. But it's good to be back. Finally, we're here. I'm live in the studio here in Wales. I'm excited about my guest tonight because it might have slipped your mind or it may not have. There's been a big interview, isn't there, between Meghan and Harry and Oprah Winfrey, and that's obviously making huge headlines at the moment with the royal family sending out a statement as well. And of course, not forgetting the resignation or the fact that Piers Morgan has now quit Good Morning Britain. Would you believe it? Now, of course, a lot of people are celebrating. Some aren't. Some loved him. He's like Marmite. You either love him or you hate him. But we're not here to discuss that tonight. We're here for something completely different. It may have slipped your mind, but a lot has been happening in Scottish politics, and in particular, you know the story, Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond. Now, to bring you up to speed, I want to show you this clip so you're going to know what we're going to be talking about tonight before I speak to my guest.
A culture of secret and cover-up, and it is all taking place on Nicola Sturgeon's watch.
I don't think Ruth Davidson is in the position to lecture anyone about democracy.
A clash between two titans of Scottish politics, but its origins lie with another. Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon's former boss and mentor, and how her government handled allegations of sexual harassment against him. He says there was a plot to bring him down and that she misled the Scottish Parliament over what she knew and when. Ms Sturgeon says he's delusional and there's no evidence. It's all the subject of a Holyrood inquiry. But that was thrown into turmoil this week when evidence submitted by Mr Salmond had parts redacted, leading to accusations that Miss Sturgeon's political allies had interfered in the process, and to these compelling scenes at First Minister's questions today.
Does the First Minister understand why to the public, this looks like a cover-up when the exact evidence that's being redacted is the most damaging to her personally?
Scrutiny of me is, as I said earlier, it's important, it's necessary, it's entirely legitimate. What is not legitimate is to pursue a conspiracy theory, a scorched earth policy that threatens the reputation and the integrity of Scotland's independent justice institutions just because you happen to dislike this government, and to sacrifice all of that, if I may say so, presiding officer, on the altar of the ego of one man.
So there you go, folks. Wow. Well, that was quite a lively debate, wasn't it? Nicola Sturgeon has been accused of misleading Parliament. Imagine being the First Minister and accused of that. And, of course, breaching the ministerial code. But here's the frightening part. It's cost the taxpayer there in Scotland. Of course, us here in England as well. We all contribute to these devolved administrations. A small sum of just £500,000. For those of you who don't work it out, that's £500,000. That's a lot of money for an inquiry, for a cover-up, apparently, and it's still ongoing. And that's why I'm so glad to have my guest on tonight. He is a political commentator and a strategic advisor. He's got his feet on the ground. He's a good old Scotsman. His name is Ewan Gurr, and he joins me now all the way from Scotland. Ewan, good evening.
Good evening. How are you, Richard?
I'm okay. Well, what a time it's been for the Scottish Parliament. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It's been like a circus up there the last few weeks, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for us in Scotland, it's particularly unusual as well because we're used to the Scottish Government being very very much supported. They're very professional in their handling of the devolved responsibility that they have, and for them to be put under the microscope to the extent that they have for the relationship of both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, which has been obviously at the centre of this whole conversation, to have taken centre stage is really quite unusual, and it's unnerving for those who are obviously in the Scottish Government because they're used to obviously seeing the polls moving in their favour, but things have obviously been a bit tweaked by recent circumstances. So it's an interesting time in Scottish politics.
Yeah, we're going to come to the polls and the elections because the 6th of May, obviously, we've got the local elections, not just in Scotland, in Wales and all across the country. But I want to get to the story first because to some of our viewers, they might not fully understand what's been happening, Ewan, in regards to the story itself, because if I'm right, obviously there's been accusations that Nicola Sturgeon has misled Parliament. Now, that is a serious accusation, and of course, in breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct. Well, what does that mean? What has actually happened, Ewan? Explain to us.
Yeah, so this all goes back to claims of sexual misconduct in direct relation to staff members of the then First Minister Alex Salmond. This was around 2014, 2015. As many know, in fact, I think it even stretches back to 2013, but as many know, he was the First Minister of Scotland up until towards the end of 2014, when he lost the referendum. And so staff members were talking about, or certainly the complainants, as they're now described, came forward with evidence of sexual misconduct. There was a lot of talk about working late, alcohol consumption, all that kind of stuff. And obviously those charges were brought to the High Court in Edinburgh. Alex Salmond was acquitted of all charges.
I'm going to say, so he was acquitted of that. So there was a criminal trial, basically a criminal trial against him for these allegations of sexual harassment, and he was cleared, wasn't he? He was cleared of, so there was no conviction, he was cleared.
That's correct. So what's happened since then, of course, is that there has been an investigation by a committee set up specifically by the Scottish Parliament that looks into the Scottish Government's handling of sexual harassment allegations, which is obviously very serious. I think if all of us have sisters, mums, wives, daughters, we want to see a society where if something like this occurs, that women have the confidence and assurance that they can raise these issues and they be dealt with openly and transparently, but also in a manner that enables them to seek justice. What's happened more recently is that the microscope has been turned specifically on the Scottish Government. The committee that is looking into this obviously wasn't about a retrial of Alex Salmond. It wasn't about looking at what he did or did not do. What it was about was seeking his evidence to help aid the understanding of how the Scottish Government conducts its investigation into allegations. And because he was a key component to the legislation that was established during his time as First Minister to deal with that misconduct, that's why he was giving evidence. However, in the process, what he's done is he's been able to point the finger at the Scottish Government in multiple areas where there have been key failings in relation to the investigation specifically into him. That was a 6-hour session that took place 2 weeks ago, and then last week there was an 8-hour session where the current First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, of course, was brought into that. The key thing that you're relating, bringing up just now, Richard, is specifically in the allegation that Alex Salmond made, that the date in which Nicola Sturgeon says she found out about the allegations are actually a month later than he specifies that he had actually made her aware of that. And that was a meeting that was called in March of, I think, I forget the year. I think it might have been 2018. And basically what had happened is there had been a meeting called by her office where the former advisor of Alex Salmond during his tenure was brought into a meeting with the First Minister. It's alleged that at that point she was made aware of the allegations. However, she says it was a month later when Alex Salmond went specifically to her house in April of that year. So this is the point, is that he's saying that she has misled Parliament, and that is therefore a breach of the ministerial code, which under normal circumstances would lead to a resignation. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, I listened to the inquiry, not all 8 hours of it, with Nicola Sturgeon, and it was quite apparent that she was quite forgetful on a number of things. Dates come to mind, and scenarios that she was in, and there was a lot of I can't remember, maybe, ifs, buts. And whilst I'm not saying she's lying, I wouldn't make that accusation. I would say that for members of the public, when they see a politician in an inquiry conducting herself in that way, forgetting, details, granular details that she should really remember, because she's quite a sharp cookie, let's be honest, as a politician. She's not short of a few brain cells as Nicola Sturgeon. I just wondered if members of the public are losing, their trust in politicians in Scotland, because the scenes I saw in the Scottish Parliament were, I don't think I've ever seen before. Not just with the exchanges that took place with the First Minister, but really personal attacks on her own integrity, really. And that's going to have an impact now, because of course we're going to come to it now. With the elections coming up, the SNPs set to take a majority, with all the polls showing that they were asking, part of their manifesto is for a referendum on Scottish independence. Now, I'm not going to discuss the pros and cons of Scottish independence tonight with you, but I want to ask you the question: do you think this now has scuppered their chances of winning the election with that in their manifesto? Because the polls suggesting that the vote for independence, the referendum, I should say, has started to slide, hasn't it?
It has, and not only support for Scottish independence, but also support for the Scottish National Party, which at this point is critical. Just to raise a few points there, Richard, in response, you're absolutely right. There were 53 recorded occasions during Nicola Sturgeon's evidence session where she indicated that she wasn't sure, she would need to check that, she had forgotten. Obviously, her political opponents have made a great deal of hay out of this, as you would expect. The Conservatives Scottish Conservatives actually constructed a video which, in the space of about 2 minutes, recorded all of those moments. So it's a tricky time for them. What's interesting is there was a poll that was conducted the day before Alex Salmond had given evidence, and even at that point, this was very much in the news. It was getting a lot of coverage in the newspapers and on television. Various aspects of the case was being looked at in the committee hearing. What was interesting is they did a poll the day before Alex Salmond was due to give evidence, and at that point, for the first time in almost a year, Richard, there was 22 polls that had shown a growth in support for independence.
Yeah.
But this one particular poll showed that the Unionists had gone into a 1-point lead. Now, this was even before Alex Salmond had given evidence. So I think it was interesting that some of those soft Unionists that might have lent their support to the yes side in a poll or whatever have been a bit tweaked by this, a bit concerned by that. And what was also interesting in relation to that poll was the fact that it mentioned the support for the SNP had dropped by 1% in the constituency and 2% on the regional list. Now, the regional list is a tricky one for the SNP, because if they sweep the boards on the constituency level, which is highly likely, then obviously the regional list gives access to a whole number of the other parties. Now, the SNP would like to pick up a few of those seats, but it looks like a lot of that will probably go to the Conservatives or to Labour, who are in second and third place at the moment.
And I think what it's done is galvanised the Unionists in it, and there's been this real rally. And I think I'm listening to you carefully, because you know more about Scottish politics than I do. But I've noticed George Galloway is kind of playing a part in this, because he's been quite strategic in the last few weeks, telling people how to vote. Those who support him and his party. He's been doing tactical voting, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. I mean, just to go back to say as well, I mean, regarding, you mentioned Nicola Sturgeon, she is a very competent politician, no doubt about that. I've met Nicola on 3 or 4 occasions, had lengthy meetings with her on two of those occasions, and it's clear she is a very gifted politician. I've also met Alex Salmond on 3 occasions, and he is a political giant. I mean, very intellectual, very smart. And very engaging, actually, as a character. He was very friendly with my team when we went to launch. He came to the launch of a food bank, which was in his constituency, which I was involved with at that time. That was in a previous job. And so what's interesting is there's a lot of different characters that are emerging, and George Galloway is one of those. He's obviously from the fine city of Dundee, which is where I live. Very well known in the city, but yeah, he has basically made it clear that rather than trying to secure votes for his own party which he's set up. The Alliance for Unity, which he now leads, is seeking to encourage tactical voting. So he will be openly voting for the Conservatives at constituency level in Dumfries. And it's highly likely that MSP will get in because there's a lot of support in Dumfries and the borders for the Conservatives. So I think, to come back to your original point, Richard, you're absolutely right that the election is on a knife edge now. The SNP looked, there was a lot of pessimism among the unionist parties that the SNP were going to sweep the boards. The issue is now that with this drop in support, and I think they're going to leak more support in coming weeks, the difficulty that puts on the SNP is their ability to then secure that mandate for a second independence referendum is going to be very difficult. You know as well as I do, obviously, you and I sit on different sides on the union. I'm a supporter of Scottish independence, but at the same time, I'm not a supporter of the SNP, and I am concerned about the democratic legitimacy and the intellectual integrity of Scottish politics at the moment. I think that's the key concern for me at the moment.
Yeah, I want to dig a bit deep now, because I know you've written a number of articles on your website as well, which is in the titles and descriptions. I know you wrote for the Evening Telegraph. The title was "Scottish Politics Needs an Injection of Integrity After the Handling of the Salmond Case." I mean, there is a sense that they've lost trust with the public. We've seen it when politicians do certain things. We can see it in the polls. The whole idea of them running away with the elections and, having a majority, yes, but also based on the idea of calling for a referendum as part of their manifesto promise. Now, the polls have shown that that's sliding. Is that because of a lack of integrity in the SNP with Nicola Sturgeon as the leader? Whether, we're not accusing her of doing anything right or wrong here. My point is that the story's out there, isn't it? And people are watching it, and Scottish people, no doubt, are watching it and thinking, can I really trust these politicians? I mean, where does it leave politics in Scotland? Because you've got obviously you've got the Labour, you've got Conservatives, you've got some of the fringe parties. Is there a gap in the market for a new party? You mentioned, for example, Scottish independence. You support Scottish independence, whereas I don't believe in independence in any shape or form. I believe in the union, as you know, but we're not going to discuss that tonight, Ewan. But do you think that there's a place like George Galloway's a charismatic figure, for example, right? He's always in front of the TV screen. He's always got something to say, and he's made an impact in different ways. Do you think there's a place now for the possibility of a new party or new parties to merge, as we've seen across the country with Reform Party, rebranded from the Brexit Party, with Reclaim, with Lawrence Fox, for example? There always seems to be these gaps in politics, doesn't there, where it gives an opportunity for a new party to rise. Do you think that is possibly something that could happen in Scotland, given the state of politics right now?
Yeah. First thing I would say, Richard, is you are a supporter of independence because you supported Brexit.
Well, that's different.
Well, you and I are on the same page on that one. As you know, I'm a supporter of both political independence from Westminster, but also from Brussels. So you and I agree on that one entirely. But the interesting thing is, you're right. I think there is. I mean, there's already a number of new parties that have emerged. I think there's a sense in Scotland that for some parties that there's obviously a number of the new political parties that are setting up that have a constitutional commitment to Scottish independence. It's almost as if the message is that Scottish independence is too precious to leave it in the hands of the SNP, because I think there is this concern that actually it's going to be lost, because the SNP are very comfortable. I have to say that, Richard, is there's a situation where they have an overwhelming majority of MPs in Westminster who are coining in I think it was like £82,000 a year, not including expenses. You have a just shy of a majority of SNP MSPs in Holyrood who earn £64,000 a year, not including expenses. And then there's a number of the 32 local authorities that are SNP. So obviously there's a lot of support for them at the moment, and it's largely driven by this one issue of independence. The domestic issues, unfortunately, sometimes get left in disarray. So areas like education, there's a number of concerns around that, particularly at the moment in the midst of the pandemic and children being at home. home and this homeschooling situation. Health is obviously consistently under scrutiny, transport, and obviously things like the hate crime bill have been very interesting. But to come to your point regarding support for the SNP, what's interesting is they've lost a lot of members recently. A friend of mine who I was speaking to on the phone tonight, he has just left the SNP after, get this, 54 years of membership. He's been with them for over half a century. He's 72 years old himself, is a committed supporter of Scottish independence and also leaving the European Union, which obviously...
What was his reason, though? What was his reason? After all those years being a member of the SNP, what did he tell you? What were his main reasons?
I'm getting there, Richard. Yeah. So his reason is one of three main reasons why there's been such a number of SNP members that have left. I gather from a few insiders that it's into double figures. So we're talking about over at least over 10,000. So the SNP has been making a big noise about the fact they've welcomed over 7,000 new members, recently because of Nicola Sturgeon's performance. But one insider told me that the number, he thinks it's over 25,000. So there was three tranches, and I'll come to Don's reason for leaving in just a moment. But the first reason for an exodus from the SNP was among the sort of trans allies and equality activists who were displeased that the Scottish Government had placed an amendment against the Hate Crime and Public Order Bill, which is currently going through the Scottish Parliament, which many are concerned as a breach of free speech, free thought, free expression. And secondly, the second part of that legislation does raise a number of concerns, but there was an amendment placed down by the Scottish Government which enabled those gender equality activists and those who are supportive of feminists and who are supportive of gender rights for women. It gave them that ability to speak very openly and freely about their concerns about the transgender question and the amendments to the Gender Recognition Act in Scotland. So a lot of these activists left. In one particular case, Out for Independence, which is obviously LGBT supporting, over half of their committee has left in the last year. So there's a lot of concern there. The second tranche was among feminists and gender rights activists, and obviously those who are very supportive of women's rights, who were really concerned that the SNP then withdrew that amendment, which enabled women to speak openly and freely about this particular issue, but also the fact that Nicola Sturgeon, because of her concern about the number of trans allies and equality activists that had left, recorded a video saying, "Stay with us." And it was a very open plea. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon doesn't make these videos lightly, but she saw the numbers that were leaving. And so obviously that led to a number of those activists leaving. But the third tranche came very quick after that, and that was due that was the biggest number that left, and that was due to the sacking of Joanna Cherry, who was a front bench member. She is obviously a lesbian woman, is a very gifted QC and a very eloquent speaker and competent politician, but she's been very supportive of women's rights and very critical of the transgender question, and absolutely opposes any amendments to the Gender Recognition Act. So obviously these three tranches left a significant number leaving. The reason Don specifically left, who I mentioned just a moment ago, and he's gone on public record, so I know I'll be seeing him tomorrow, he won't have any concerns about me telling you about that. But the fact is he left because of the hate crime bill. It was just, he said, for me, it's just the final straw that has broke the camel's back. He says, I'm supportive of political independence, leaving the European Union. I've campaigned in the northeast of Scotland for years. People don't understand why we would want to leave the jurisdiction of one political union only to weld ourselves to another one, which we've just left. And that's the challenge that he's facing. So for the first time, he will not be voting the SNP at an election. And he's one of the people that's interested in supporting new parties and new initiatives. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a space.
Yeah, there is. I was going to say, obviously, what you mentioned there is a lot to do with domestic politics, things that maybe that don't make the big headlines. So, for example, the whole thing with Nicola Sturgeon now and Alex Salmond, and allegations that have been made against her for all kinds of things. That they make the news, they make the rags and the mags and the mainstream media. But of course, what you've mentioned there, that the SNP has seen an exodus of their membership over domestic issues, internal issues that lots of us don't get to hear about, but they're getting to hear about it tonight on Rich Politics, thankfully. But that's important. What do you think is going to happen? Let's play it out. How are the elections going to play out then, do you think, there in Scotland, Ewan?
Well, what I'm hearing, a lot of the commentary at the moment, which is in the public domain, Richard, is very similar to the commentary that we were hearing in 2016. It was almost that the SNP were in an unassailable position at that point. There was a lot of political energy in Scotland, and I have to say, largely positive, Richard. There was a real sort of politicization of young people and middle-aged people who'd maybe never really considered politics. They maybe showed up at the ballot box and flexed their democratic muscle, but never really engaged with the issues. And I think what we see now is you can talk to anybody. I remember Jim Murphy, the former Scottish Labour leader, was telling me a story. This was in 2015 when he was the leader of Labour, and he said to me, Ewan, he says, I was out one night at the pub, and this was during the referendum campaign he was referring to, I think a year or two prior to that, and he'd been out at the pub with a friend of his in Glasgow. And he said there was a number of women that were sitting at the table next to us. It was a hen party, probably about 15, 20 women. And he says they were talking about fiscal autonomy. He said it was just an amazing moment where Scotland became alive with this energy. I think what's concerning, of course, is for me, and you and I have talked about this very briefly, Richard, in the past, is how the debate has become very toxic in some areas. And I think this is certainly the case on social media, is that you can have someone just berating an absolute stranger because of a political view on something. So I think for me, just in terms of how things will play out, I think that the SNP are going to struggle to secure the majority that they need. It depends how well the Greens do, because of course the Greens lend their support to the SNP, which gets their budgets through, various policies through. The smacking ban was obviously something that was put down by the Greens, backed by the SNP. There's been policies that the SNP have put down, which will be backed by the Greens. The hate crime and public order bill is going to be an example of that. But I think that this whole situation of members leaving, the SNP having a number of areas where there is a clear division over gender, over the notion of what equality is, over the climate. These are all issues where people are split right down the middle. Even the European question regarding the European Union, there's a number of Eurosceptic members who are of that traditional Eurosceptic bent, which were part of the SNP over 30 and 40 years ago, that are just scunnered. And I think the problem is that a number of these folk are obviously drifting out. There's a number of people who are fully committed to independence but are not even convinced that the SNP wants it anymore, because they are in this, what they think is a comfortable position. So in answer to your question, I think the SNP will probably fall short of a majority. And it entirely depends on how well the Greens will do. The current projections suggest the Greens will go from 6 regional seats to 8, possibly as high as 10. If they secure that, that could tip the SNP over the line in terms of the majority that they need. But I think that the Unionists have a real opportunity here if they can craft a message that is compelling. And the fact is, there is a message there, although I don't necessarily support that. There is a coherent message there. You talk about the issues of the economy and the currency, which the independent side have never offered a good, coherent and compelling response to. If you play on those issues and highlight the girth of the union and the potential that the union has in the future, it may be the very thing that swings it away from the SNP. So it's a very interesting time, Richard.
Yeah, so it looks like we might be heading for a coalition government in Scotland. I mean, you mentioned a couple of things I want to pick up on there, Ewan, and because our time is almost up, believe it or not, but let me just go through a couple of things. You mentioned, those calling for independence, whether it be in Scotland or whether it be down here in Wales. We have the same with Plaid Cymru and some of the fringe parties. And you and I have discussed this on a number of occasions, the vitriol and the attitude sometimes of what we call nationalists can be quite nasty, and they don't really help themselves in their cause. And I think you've experienced it the same there in Scotland. We've talked about, you don't represent that side of it. I know we've talked, even though your political views and independence are different to mine and the union, but, you know, we still talk to one another. We're still friends. We still chat. And I think, you know, having those discussions and debates are important. As you said, the unionists have an opportunity, as we do down here in Wales with the elections in May, you know, when you consider questions on independence over currency, the economy, the way the NHS has been handled, education, all those areas that have been devolved, and the mess that they're in currently in Wales and in Scotland on all measurements. When you look at that and you say, well, if we can't do it with what we've got now with these devolved areas, would it be even worse with independence? And it's answering those really big questions for the electorate. And I think the SNP, and actually I think Nicola Sturgeon, has actually scuppered any chances that you guys have had to call for a referendum on independence. Even though I know Westminster have got a consent to it, which I know that Nicola Sturgeon don't like that, and neither do the SNP. It's going to be a long battle, an uphill battle for you now, isn't it, to really push that through, even if a new party rises. It's going to be a big ask, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I absolutely agree with what you just said there, Richard. I remember sitting with my local MP only a year ago, Chris Law. He's a lovely man, represents Dundee West for the SNP at Westminster. And I said to him, Chris, I said, you know, we're in the middle of the negotiation process, the final stages of the Brexit process. And I said, do you ever think, when you're sitting on your side of the House of Commons and you listen to the debate and you see the challenges that are created by the exit from a 46-year union with the European Union, do you ever stay awake at night thinking, actually, how difficult is it going to be to extricate ourselves from a union that is over 300 years old? I said, because Chris, as a supporter of independence, I'm concerned about that. I am. It's, you know, I believe the prospectus. I think there's a grand vision. Certainly in 2014 that was the case. But at the moment, the debate is entirely fueled by a disdain for Westminster and a concern about the governance of Boris Johnson. It's not so much about the fact that there is a really compelling message for Scottish independence at the moment. And so the interesting thing is, Richard, they said, yeah, he says, I do sometimes worry about that. So I think there is an element of concern and caution. But I think the difficulty for me is, and this is the thing I was referring to regarding the toxicity of the debate, is that the SNP has potentially poisoned the well with our unionist compatriots, because ultimately, if we enter into a negotiation process, we need to have a convivial and respectful relationship with Westminster if we're ever going to secure a competent deal for the future. I mean, a couple of months ago, the SNP were saying, let's just roll over, let's avoid no deal at all costs. I'm thinking, no, let's not roll over at all costs, because if we do that in our negotiations with Westminster, we could end up in an even worse position. So I think for a unionist like yourself, Richard, you have the ability to sit down, have a dram, and feel quite positive about things at the moment. I think the battle lies ahead for the Scottish Government and for the SNP and for the supporters of Scottish independence. It's going to be a tricky few years. Having said that, I think that once current situation blows over, I think the SNP has the ability to drive the argument again. But this is an opportunity. This is a democratic opportunity in the next 2 months for the unionists to get their act together, to get a compelling message regarding the union out there, and to try and set the record straight regarding what they would do to resolve some of the domestic issues that we're facing in Scotland. If they do that, they will deny the SNP a majority, but it's entirely in their hands at the moment.
Yeah. Well, one thing's for sure, the elections this year in May are going to be very, very interesting. Very, very different, because we're living in very different times with COVID and everything else, the impact that has had. Any idea of postponing elections has been ruled out here, certainly in Wales now, with it going ahead. And as of next Friday or whenever it is, the next review is, we should be allowed to campaign, because we haven't even been allowed to campaign yet, which has been a pain, not being able to campaign. But thank God we're going to be able to, because there are votes out there. And I'm sure, you know, the most important thing in all of this is that we still live in a democratic society. We still have, the right for people to vote and for them to decide who they want to represent them. And that's one thing we can all champion. And we can all say, thank God that we still have that democracy. Because, of course, Brexit highlighted, a time where that democracy, in my opinion, I remember running commentary and doing stuff on it and interviews, it was under threat because 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union. And we had politicians who thought they knew better trying to go against the biggest democratic vote in history. Thank God, after so many years, that was finally over the line and we got Brexit done in one shape or another. Not everyone's happy with all of it, but most of it. But now coming to these local elections, they can have a huge impact, aren't they, on people's daily lives. And I think people forget. People often say to me, Rich, why are you involved in politics? What's the point? It doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect my family. And I have to remind them, it does affect you. It does affect your family for the simple reason legislation, laws, budgets, economy, health, all those areas, they will affect you as a citizen. And I think it's important on May the 6th. They're in Scotland, as in Wales, there's many people, you have the right to vote. Don't waste your vote. Think about who you're going to vote for. It's very important. Ewan, before I let you go, I just want to ask you one more question. This has nothing to do with Scottish politics. What do you make of the Oprah Winfrey interview? And what do you make of Piers Morgan quitting Good Morning Britain?
Well, I sat up last night and watched the full hour and 20 minutes. I'm still trying to work out what I think of it all. I think what's clear is I am definitely a skeptic of the monarchy. I think I really like the Queen. I think she's a wonderful woman. I think there's a lot of integrity there. I think she's very gifted. Sometimes when you need her to say something, she just comes with a degree of clarity. I generally, she's won me over in terms of I always watch the Queen's speech on Christmas Day. So I really, really fond of the Queen. But I know there is a lot of skepticism regarding the rest of the royal family, the institution, Prince Charles. I think, God love that woman and bless her. I hope she stays alive for a long time to come. But when that day comes that she is no longer queen, I think that the monarchy will have a very tough sell. So I think that what's the interview last night, I felt as a human being, I felt sad. I really felt for both Meghan and Harry. I think they've had a tough time. It's not an easy institution to be a part of. And I really think the sense of isolation that she's experienced, she obviously went into this very uninformed. It was quite clear, she said at the outset of that interview, that she didn't look into it. And I think that's to her deficit. I think what's interesting, though, is I really heard the heart of Harry when he was talking about the concerns he had about, another crisis coming. He obviously was there when his mum was hounded by the media. She was very popular. And I think he saw some of those similarities in his own wife. And so it was a concerning interview in some sense. I think it's an institution that is crumbling. I don't think it's going to be there for forever. And I think the next 50 years are going to be very tricky for the monarchy to sell itself, because anywhere you look in the country, although there is a majority of support for the monarchy, it is on the decrease. Unheard did some really interesting polling on this. So on that level, I feel a concern on both sides on a human level. But regarding Piers Morgan, I saw him today in the interview that he had and walking off stage and things like that. And I think the guy's a contrarian, I like, as a Democrat, I love to listen to conflicting voices, and especially listening and hearing those and reading books by those that I disagree with, because I need to be challenged. And so I like Piers for that reason. I find myself in disagreement with him a lot of the time, but I think he's very emotion driven. And I think just walking off the stage and throwing his career, although he'll have numerous other opportunities, but throwing Good Morning Britain to the wind and saying I'm off, that's typical Piers Morgan.
Well, I was going to say, because his arch nemesis is Sir Lord Alan Sugar, isn't it? They always have a spat on social media, and I couldn't wait to see what Lord Sugar had to say about him. And one of the things with Piers, he's good at dishing it out, though. But obviously, when he gets it back to him, I've been on a show with Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid many, many moons ago, talking about crime and burglaries and all that kind of stuff and advising them. And I was on there with him, and he had a bit of a dig at me, because of my past, and I was able to, overcome it and just put him in his place, because he is a character, whether you like it or not. And no doubt he's got other opportunities lined up. There is talk, maybe possibility of some news channels picking him up, some of the new ones that are about there. Who really knows? But hey, listen, it's been an exciting week. It's been great talking to you. Thanks for coming on. Look forward to having you on again. And we'll definitely have you on again another time. I don't know how, I don't know when, but we shall meet again.
Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. And, you and I are political friends and will remain as such, because you and I can have a civil and respectful engagement, but still disagree on stuff. That's the way it's meant to be. So thanks for having me.
Like I disagree with you on the monarchy because I'm a royalist, even though I'm a Welshman. I disagree on independence, but we can still have a laugh about it. Ewan, thanks for coming on. And to all of our guests and followers and friends watching the broadcast, don't forget to check Ewan out. The website and all of his articles are available as well, all on his website in the description. Make sure you check that out. And I'll catch you the same time, same place, somewhere next week. This Welshman ranting about all things politics. Catch you soon on Rich Politics.